When you look at your life, you often only see what is right in front of you. The deadlines, the pressure, the conflict, the confusion. You see the people who resist you, the opportunities that seem to slip away, the emotions that rise and fall with no warning. But what you don't see is often more influential than anything happening in the physical world. And this is where the Holy Spirit steps in. He is fully aware of the invisible dimension that surrounds every decision, every breakthrough, and every challenge you face. You might interpret something as coincidence, as bad timing, or as someone's attitude toward you. But the Holy Spirit recognizes the deeper spiritual forces that shape these moments. He sees the invisible war long before you ever feel its effects. This is why some days you wake up heavy and you can't explain why. It's why certain relationships suddenly grow tense without a clear reason. It's why certain opportunities close just as you begin to prepare for them. The Holy Spirit perceives dynamics you cannot detect with human reasoning alone. He understands that your life is not isolated. It is interconnected with spiritual currents, emotional histories, generational patterns, and destinies that reach far beyond your current moment. So while you're trying to fix things on the surface, He is handling the conflict at its root. He confronts the spiritual resistance before it becomes a physical problem. He dismantles what was designed to discourage you before it ever reaches your doorstep. Many people try to fight visible battles with visible strength. They try to argue with people, force outcomes, push harder, or blame themselves for not being enough. But the Holy Spirit operates with a different kind of clarity. He knows that some of your greatest battles are not against circumstances. They are against the unseen forces shaping those circumstances. And when the Holy Spirit fights for you, He doesn't fight the symptoms. He goes straight for the source. He intercepts spiritual attacks before they become emotional breakdowns. He breaks demonic strategies before they manifest as real-world losses. He disrupts cycles designed to repeat, so they never have the chance to begin again. This is why certain things you feared never actually happened. You thought something terrible was coming, but it never arrived. You thought a door was about to close, but somehow it stayed open. You thought a person was planning to undermine you, but the situation shifted before any damage was done. That wasn't luck. That was the Holy Spirit neutralizing an attack you didn't even know was forming. You were being defended long before you felt the need to defend yourself. Think about how comforting that is. The Holy Spirit is not reactive. He is proactive. He is not waiting for you to fall apart so He can come rescue you. He sees the spiritual landscape of your life like a master strategist watching a battle unfold from above. He understands the terrain you are walking through, the traps set ahead, and the weaknesses waiting to be exploited. And He positions Himself exactly where the pressure is building, pushing back darkness with a strength that is far greater than anything coming against you. So even when you feel unaware, He is fully aware. Even when you feel vulnerable, He is fully engaged. Even when you feel uncertain, He is already handling the situation from angles you don't even know exist. If you only knew how many battles were won for you before you ever recognized there was a fight, you would walk with a different confidence. You would stop assuming you are unprotected. You would stop believing you are alone. And you would stop interpreting every challenge as evidence that God has abandoned you. The truth is far more powerful. The Holy Spirit is already where the battle is, and He is already doing what you cannot do. Carry that truth with you. Let it change the way you walk into stressful situations, the way you handle fear, the way you interpret conflict. Because when you understand that the Holy Spirit sees what you cannot see, you stop living from reaction and you start living from revelation. And the moment you begin to live from revelation, every battle shifts in your favor. There are moments in life when even the strongest, most disciplined, most spiritually mature individuals find themselves overwhelmed. It is not a sign of weakness, it is simply the human experience. You reach a point where language fails you. Your thoughts become tangled, your emotions feel too heavy to carry, and even the act of forming a prayer feels like lifting a mountain. And it's precisely in those moments that the Holy Spirit steps into a role far deeper than we often acknowledge. He becomes the voice you can't find, the strength you can't access, and the intercessor you didn't realize you needed. Think about the psychology of exhaustion. When a person is emotionally drained, cognitive clarity diminishes, memory weakens, decision-making becomes cloudy. The mind goes into a survival state rather than a strategic one. Spiritually, the same thing happens. When your inner world becomes exhausted, your prayers shrink to survival-level thoughts. God, help me. God, do something. God, I'm tired. And yet, even these fragmented expressions are deeply powerful because the Holy Spirit translates them into something precise and intentional. Your weakness does not limit Him. Your silence does not confuse Him. Your inability to articulate what you're feeling does not interrupt His work on your behalf. There is something remarkably comforting about knowing that God designed a system in which human fragility does not disqualify us from divine strength. You may feel like you're failing when you don't know what to pray, but the Holy Spirit sees it differently. He steps into the gap between your limited language and God's unlimited power. He intercedes, not by guessing, not by approximating, but with a perfect understanding of both your internal condition and God's eternal plan. He speaks the language of your soul fluently, whether or not you do. Sometimes your battles intensify not because you're doing something wrong, but because you're walking through a season of transformation. And transformation often comes with confusion. You can't see the full picture yet. You don't know why certain people left. You don't know why certain opportunities closed. You don't know why you feel a strange mix of emptiness and expectation. But the Holy Spirit interprets all of that. He knows when your tears are really prayers for strength. He knows when your silence is a request for clarity. He knows when your frustration is an indicator that your environment is too small for what God is preparing in you. And He does not judge you for any of it. Instead, He surrounds you. He prays through you. He carries you. There are times when you've walked into situations with a confidence you didn't earn, because the Holy Spirit infused you with courage while you were still feeling afraid. There were nights you slept peacefully, not because your mind was calm, but because He rested on your spirit and turned anxiety into stillness. There were decisions you made that led to breakthrough, not because you knew exactly what you were doing, but because the Holy Spirit nudged you, guided you, and strengthened you when your own reasoning was too tired to function clearly. This is why you must stop interpreting exhaustion as abandonment. You must stop treating emotional heaviness as spiritual failure. The presence of the Holy Spirit in your weakness is not evidence of defeat. It is evidence of divine partnership. He doesn't wait for you to become strong before He intercedes. He intercedes to make you strong. That means your lowest moment may actually be the moment heaven is working the hardest on your behalf. If you truly understood how passionately the Holy Spirit advocates for you when you cannot advocate for yourself, you would never again assume that silence equals distance. His strongest work often happens in the seasons when you feel least capable. He stands in your place, prays through your weakness, and pushes your destiny forward, even when your strength is gone. So when you feel overwhelmed, don't withdraw in shame. Lean into the awareness that you are being carried. Let that truth steady you. Let it shift the way you interpret your own weakness. Because in the moments when you cannot speak for yourself, the Spirit of God is already speaking with power, purpose, and perfect precision. And when you finally rise again, you will rise on prayers you never prayed, but prayers the Holy Spirit prayed for you. Expand key point 3 into a 600-word segment that flows naturally within the overall speech, aligning seamlessly with the other key points. The tone should be intellectual and authoritative, yet accessible, mirroring Dr. David Yonggi Cho motivational approach. The language should be clear and direct, with a focus on psychological and philosophical depth. Avoid any formal headings, keeping the delivery conversational, as if speaking to an audience in a lecture or interview format. Conclude with a powerful, concise closing statement that leaves the audience with something to reflect on, motivating them to act on the insights shared. There are battles in life that don't come from the outside. They don't arrive as storms, enemies, or visible hardships. Some of the most difficult battles happen internally, quietly, beneath the surface where no one else can see them. These are the battles of the mind, the heart, the memory. And often, these hidden struggles shape your destiny far more than any external challenge ever could. What makes them dangerous is not their intensity, it's their subtlety. You can live years carrying a fear you never question, a belief you never challenge, or a wound you never fully acknowledge. But the Holy Spirit specializes in entering these inner chambers and breaking chains you didn't even realize were restraining you. Human psychology shows us that people operate according to patterns, reactions, emotions, and behaviors shaped by past experiences. If those experiences were painful, the emotional residue can stay locked inside the subconscious, directing decisions without your awareness. You might think you're making choices freely, when in reality, an old wound is pulling the strings. You avoid opportunities, not because you're unqualified, but because fear whispers a lie from a childhood moment. You sabotage relationships not because you're unloving, but because a buried memory taught you not to trust. You carry insecurity not because you lack worth, but because someone planted a damaging idea years ago. And these internal battles continue until someone stronger steps in to confront them at their roots. This is where the Holy Spirit's work becomes deeply transformative. He does not merely heal what you are aware of. He brings awareness to what you have buried. He shines a light into corners of your soul where darkness has lived for too long. He reveals attitudes you thought were personality traits, but were actually defense mechanisms built from old pain. He exposes the subtle lies you've rehearsed in your mind until they sounded like truth. And he does all of this not to shame you, but to free you. There is a moment in every believer's life when the Holy Spirit begins to touch an area they've avoided for years. And it's almost always uncomfortable at first. You might feel a sudden emotional tension, a stirring in your spirit, a conviction that feels strangely specific. That is not punishment, that is surgery. That is the Spirit identifying a chain you didn't realize was still wrapped around your soul. You may have built your life around compensating for it, but He knows you were never meant to carry it. What makes the Holy Spirit unique is His ability to break internal chains without destroying the person. A human confrontation can feel harsh, but the Spirit's confrontation is precise and compassionate. He corrects with clarity. He reveals with gentleness. And He heals with a depth no therapist, mentor, or friend could reach. He goes into emotional territory that even you are afraid to explore. And He begins dismantling the structures that have held you captive. You may not even notice the freedom immediately. Sometimes you wake up one morning and realize you aren't afraid of something that used to terrify you. Sometimes you respond calmly to situations that used to trigger you. Sometimes you find yourself dreaming again when you thought those dreams died years ago. That is the Holy Spirit quietly completing a work you didn't have the language to ask for. He breaks chains by replacing lies with truth, by shifting your self-image, by rewiring your emotional responses, by reminding you who you actually are, not who life told you to become. This internal victory becomes the foundation for external breakthrough. Because once the inner world is free, the outer world begins to align. You must understand something: the battles inside you are not signs of weakness, they are signals that the Holy Spirit is preparing you for a larger life. When He breaks an inner chain, He is not just healing your past, He is protecting your future. Because every destiny is shaped not by where you go, but by who you become. So when the Holy Spirit begins to stir something deep within you, lean into it. Let Him work. Let Him break what you've learned to tolerate. Because once He frees the inner world, the outer world can no longer hold you back. And when the chains within you fall, every other battle becomes winnable. There are seasons in your life when you feel like nothing is happening. You look around and everything appears still. Too still. You don't see progress, you don't feel momentum, and you begin to question whether God is moving at all. But what you must understand is that the Holy Spirit often begins preparing you for victory long before you recognize is even a battle ahead. His work is not always loud. It is not always dramatic. Much of the time it is subtle, strategic, and hidden beneath the surface where your eyes cannot go. But just because you do not see movement does not mean there is no activity. In fact, some of the most important spiritual positioning happens in silence. Human beings are wired to interpret delay as denial. When things don't move at the speed of our expectations, we assume something is wrong, or worse, that God has forgotten us. But the Holy Spirit operates on a different timeline, a timeline shaped not by your impatience, but by your destiny. He knows when you are ready. He knows when the environment is ready. He knows when the people connected to your breakthrough are ready. So instead of forcing things prematurely, He aligns them precisely. A delay is not a setback, it's synchronization. Think about how a skilled chess master plays. Every move looks small and insignificant, yet each one is calculated toward a larger objective. In the same way, the Holy Spirit is arranging details, encounters, and decisions in your life with remarkable precision. He places you in certain rooms where you may feel unnoticed, but He is training your character. He closes certain doors, not because He wants to frustrate you, but because He is redirecting you toward a better alignment. He allows discomfort not as punishment, but as positioning, shifting you away from environments that can no longer support your growth. You may not realize it, but the Holy Spirit has already prepared solutions for problems you haven't encountered yet. He has already positioned help for battles you haven't fought. He has already orchestrated connections for assignments you haven't stepped into. Before a challenge appears in your life, the Spirit has already placed someone, something, or some revelation on your path that will serve as the key to overcoming it. This is why, when the battle finally arrives, you discover strength you didn't know you had, wisdom you don't remember learning, and opportunities that seem to show up at the perfect moment. These are not coincidences. They are the imprints of a God who prepares His people with flawless foresight. Often, the preparation process involves stretching. The Holy Spirit will allow you to walk through situations that feel beneath your potential, not because they are permanent, but because they build endurance and humility. He will let you experience seasons where you feel overlooked, because being hidden is sometimes the safest place for your development. He will expose you to challenges that seem unrelated to your calling, but later you realize they were essential training for what was coming. And yet, even in the stretching, even in the silence, even in the waiting, the Spirit is not passive. He is not observing. You are being shaped. You are being positioned. You are being upgraded internally so that when the external opportunity arrives, you do not sabotage it through unprepared character. This understanding should give you an entirely new perspective on your current season. If things feel slow, perhaps God is synchronizing something greater than your timeline can comprehend. If doors are closing, perhaps He is redirecting you toward a strategy you haven't envisioned yet. If tensions are rising, perhaps He is preparing you to step into a larger space where spiritual maturity will be required. The Holy Spirit is preparing you not just for survival, but for victory. And not a small victory, but one that establishes you, strengthens you, and reveals the depth of God's involvement in your life. His preparation is precise, His timing is intentional, and His strategy is perfect. So when you don't see movement, don't assume God is still. When you don't hear answers, don't assume He is silent. When you don't understand the season, don't assume it lacks purpose. Because the Holy Spirit begins positioning you before the battle even arrives. And that positioning is the first step toward your breakthrough. One of the most misunderstood aspects of spiritual warfare is the role of peace. Most people assume that victory is marked by noise, by action, by confrontation, by visible movement. But the Holy Spirit often signals victory through something far quieter and far more profound peace. Not the kind of peace that comes from favorable circumstances, but the kind of peace that exists in spite of them. A peace that does not make sense logically, yet grounds you emotionally. A peace that arrives before any external resolution. And this peace is not passive. It is one of the strongest weapons the Holy Spirit uses to fight for you. When a person is under pressure, the natural response is panic. The mind becomes restless. Thoughts accelerate. The heart races. Stress chemicals surge through the body. Spiritually, the same thing occurs. Panic disrupts your ability to hear God's voice, to discern wisely, or to respond with clarity. Anxiety narrows your field of vision and traps you inside imagined outcomes that may never come to pass. The enemy knows this. One of his greatest strategies is not to defeat you through direct confrontation, but to defeat you through internal agitation. If he can destabilize your peace, he can disrupt your purpose. The Holy Spirit understands this psychological and spiritual dynamic with perfect precision. He knows that an anxious heart cannot perceive divine strategy. So instead of always changing your circumstances first, He changes your internal atmosphere. Think of peace as spiritual oxygen. When you can breathe, you can think. When you can think, you can see. And when you can see, you can follow God's direction without collapsing under fear. This is why the Holy Spirit's first response to a brewing battle is not panic. It is peace. Peace creates space inside your mind where wisdom can land. Peace quiets the noise so you can discern the next step. Peace stabilizes your emotions so the enemy cannot manipulate your reactions. And here's the key: peace is not evidence that the battle is over. Peace is evidence that God has entered the battle. You may have faced situations where everything around you suggested you should be falling apart, yet something inside you remained still. You didn't know how things would work out, but you felt a strange assurance that you were not abandoned. That was not your personality. That was not emotional strength. That was the Holy Spirit fighting on your behalf, holding your mind steady, preserving your clarity, and giving you the strength to stand firm until the victory manifested. There are battles you have already survived simply because the Holy Spirit kept you calm when the enemy wanted you frantic. That calmness was not accidental, it was a shield. Many victories happen internally long before you see them externally. And this is where the philosophical depth of peace becomes clear. Peace is not the absence of conflict, it is the presence of divine authority. It is the announcement that the situation no longer belongs to panic, confusion, or fear. It belongs to God. When you carry that awareness, you stop reacting impulsively. You stop letting circumstances dictate your mood. You stop allowing fear to forecast your future. You begin to respond from a place of spiritual intelligence instead of emotional instability. The Holy Spirit is teaching you to become a person who can hold peace in pressure-filled environments. Because once peace governs your inner world, the enemy loses access to your decision-making. You become anchored, centered, steady, like someone who knows the outcome even before the battle begins. And in many ways you do, because the Holy Spirit reveals something through His peace that your circumstances have not yet shown God is already working. So the next time you face something overwhelming, pay attention to that inner stillness. Don't dismiss it. Don't overlook it. Recognize it for what it truly is, the Holy Spirit taking command. The Holy Spirit stepping into the battle. The Holy Spirit establishing victory before your eyes ever witness it. Because when peace rises, it is the Holy Spirit declaring, the battle is already shifting in your favor. There comes a point in every believer's journey when they begin to look back and realize that the very things they thought would break them actually built them. The disappointments that felt unbearable at the time later appear as turning points. The losses that seemed senseless eventually reveal themselves as divine redirections. The attacks that wounded you become the very testimonies that strengthen others. And this is where the Holy Spirit's work becomes unmistakably profound. He does not merely protect you from battles. He transforms the battles into instruments of growth, purpose, and revelation. When you go through adversity, your first instinct is often to ask, why is this happening to me? But the Holy Spirit sees the question differently. He asks, what can this produce in you? How can this elevate your understanding? How can this expand your capacity? Problems that once appeared as barriers begin to function as catalysts. The Holy Spirit repurposes pain into wisdom, confusion into clarity, and chaos into direction. This is not positive thinking, it is divine re-engineering. He takes what the enemy meant for harm and rewires its outcome until the final product reflects God's intention rather than the enemy's desire. Psychologically, humans are shaped far more by interpretation than by experience. Two people can go through the same hardship, yet one becomes bitter while the other becomes stronger. The difference lies in the meaning assigned to the event. The Holy Spirit intervenes at that critical interpretive point. He reframes your perspective so your suffering does not define you, it develops you. He whispers reminders of who you are when the world tries to label you. He teaches you to extract wisdom instead of wounds, growth instead of grief, victory instead of victimhood. And this transformative work is not theoretical. It is deeply practical. There are situations you once prayed to escape, but now you thank God you endured because they shaped your resilience. There are people who walked away, and only later did you discover their absence created space for better alignment. There are hardships you never wanted, yet they pushed you into spiritual depths you would have otherwise avoided. Every step of the journey becomes meaningful when the Holy Spirit reframes it through eternal insight. He also uses your battles to build your testimony. Not the polished version you tell others, but the internal testimony that shapes how you see God. When you've walked through a storm and come out standing, your faith is no longer theoretical. It becomes experiential. You stop knowing about God and start knowing God. You stop quoting promises and start relying on them. You stop fearing attacks because you have lived through enough of them to understand they don't have the final say. The Holy Spirit takes your pain and turns it into spiritual authority. Suddenly, the very area where you were once attacked becomes the area where you carry the most insight, compassion, and power. You begin to comfort others with the comfort you received. You begin to speak from experience rather than theory. you begin to reflect God's faithfulness because you have witnessed it firsthand. This is why nothing in your life is wasted. Not the tears, not the delays, not the betrayals, not the questions. The Holy Spirit is constantly weaving all of it into a larger story that testifies of God's involvement. What was designed to destroy you becomes the proof that you are protected. What was meant to silence you becomes the evidence that you are called. What tried to stop you becomes the confirmation that your destiny is real. And when you finally step into the fullness of what God has prepared, you will look back with a clarity you never had in the moment. You will see the fingerprints of the Holy Spirit on every chapter. You will recognize that the battle was never wasted. It was transformed. Because in the end, the Holy Spirit turns every attack into a testimony, and every testimony into undeniable proof that God was fighting for you all along.